Almost nobody slicing into their morning toast stops to ask what's actually baked into it. We pulled 10 of America's best-selling bread brands and had them run through independent lab testing after Florida's Department of Health grabbed samples directly off supermarket shelves. The result, 6 of 8 loaves came back positive for glyphosate, the core chemical in Roundup weed killer. Not out in the field, sitting in the finished loaf you're eating for breakfast. And here's the part nobody wants to admit. The worst numbers didn't show up in the discount brands. They showed up on loaves wearing organic seals, the ones aimed squarely at health-conscious parents, the ones people pay a premium for because they assume they're buying something safer. One brand crossed 1,000 parts per billion of glyphosate, among the highest figures ever logged for a packaged bread sold to consumers. You'll know the name the second we say it. We're ranking all 10, worst to first, from unsettling to alarming, then closing with the 3 loaves that actually came back clean and are worth putting in your cart. Let's start. Number 10. Great Value Whole Wheat. This is Walmart's private label loaf, the one that lands in shopping carts because it's inexpensive, familiar, and never out of stock. Before you even open the bag, try this. Press down on it. It doesn't behave like bread at all. It flattens completely, then snaps right back like a foam block shaped into a loaf. That's your first sign that something manufactured is going on inside. Independent lab work commissioned by the Detox Project and the Environmental Working Group turned up 340 parts per billion of glyphosate in Great Value whole wheat. Regulators will point out that's within legal limits. The EPA's allowable ceiling for glyphosate on wheat sits at 30,000 parts per billion. But that ceiling was calculated around a single chemical in a single food for one otherwise healthy adult, considered completely on their own. It was never built around someone already taking blood pressure medication, already absorbing glyphosate from their breakfast cereal and afternoon crackers, then layering on more at dinner. Exposure compounds. The regulation doesn't. Walmart brought in more than $713 billion in revenue last year. Sourcing cleaner wheat isn't something that company can't afford. It's a choice about protecting margin. The 80 cents you saved buying the budget loaf came with something the label never mentioned, and the cheap price tag isn't even the biggest offender here. The next brand costs considerably more and delivers the identical problem. Number 9. Market Pantry Organic. This one catches people off guard. Target has spent years building a reputation as the more thoughtful, more curated alternative. Sleeker branding, more deliberate sourcing. The store young parents gravitate toward because it feels like a step up. Their Market Pantry whole wheat sandwich loaf carries the USDA organic seal. Yet independent lab testing put it at 348 parts per billion of glyphosate. Higher than Wonder Bread, higher than Nature's Own. An organic loaf out-contaminating conventional ones. Here's the mechanism. Drift contamination. When a conventional field next door to an organic farm gets sprayed with herbicide, that mist doesn't respect property lines. It travels on the wind. USDA organic certification only confirms the grower didn't intentionally apply glyphosate. It says nothing about what blew in from the neighboring farm. Drift testing isn't mandatory, and Target isn't publishing any. A parent grabs this loaf specifically to shield their kids, pays extra because of that seal on the front. And the seal is genuine, and the contamination is just as genuine. There's no law requiring anyone to disclose the gap between the two. Organic label, 348 parts per billion, and 0 required disclosure. That's not a protection for consumers. It's a loophole the industry has been perfectly content to leave open. Number 8. Oro Wheat Organic. This is the artisan-sounding brand that quietly stopped deserving the description. 2 families started this bakery together in Los Angeles back in 1932, and for decades, it was the real thing. Family-run, California-based, built around quality. Grupo Bimbo bought it in 2009, and since then, Bimbo has swallowed up Arnold, Sara Lee, Entenmann's, Thomas, Ballpark, and a long list of others. A single multinational now owns what most shoppers still assume are separate, competing companies. Once Bimbo absorbs a label, the supply chain merges too. The same flour suppliers, the same wheat sources, potentially the same grain treated pre-harvest with glyphosate as a drying agent, feeding into one enormous industrial network. The Environmental Working Group measured 70 parts per billion of glyphosate in Oro Wheat's 100% whole wheat back in 2018. Bimbo adjusted certain formulas after that data became public, but there's been no independently published glyphosate testing on Oro Wheat Organic since. The only figure on record is still that 2018 result. Bimbo pulls in $22 billion a year. If every batch is being tested, none of that data has been released. Longtime fans of the original bakery described the old bread as denser, grainier, more textured. What's on shelves now is uniformly soft, engineered to stay that way through a long stretch on a retail shelf. You're paying for a name that stopped meaning anything years ago. Number 7. Nature's Own Flowers. Foods is one of the country's largest bread makers, pulling in roughly $5 billion annually, and Nature's Own is its flagship, a name doing a lot of heavy lifting, suggesting something wholesome and deliberately sourced. In February 2026, Florida's Department of Health tested Nature's Own butter bread and found 190.23 parts per billion of glyphosate. Their perfectly crafted white came back at 132.34. But the glyphosate is only half the story. Check what else made the ingredient list. Calcium propionate, a preservative that peer-reviewed research has linked to behavioral changes in children. Datum, a chemically altered fat that reinforces dough structure. And sodium stearoyl lactylate, an emulsifier that keeps the loaf artificially soft for weeks longer than any real bread would stay fresh. Squeeze the bag. That pillowy bounce back isn't freshness, it's chemistry. In 2025, a clip went viral showing someone soaking a single slice of Nature's Own in water, wringing it out completely, and watching it spring right back into shape without tearing. That's not bread behavior. That's a sponge shaped like a loaf. That July, a class action suit was filed in a California federal court, alleging Flowers Foods falsely advertises certain Nature's Own products as free of artificial preservatives, despite ascorbic acid appearing on the label. Flowers has denied the claims. At $5 billion a year, sourcing cleaner grain wouldn't break the company. It would just eat into the margin, and margin tends to win. If this loaf is sitting in your kitchen, you now know exactly what's in it. And if this is already shifting how you look at the bread aisle, you're about halfway through. The next few brands get considerably worse, including a premium organic label with no published testing whatsoever. Number 6. Arnold Organic. Arnold has been a staple on American shelves since 1940, and when its organic line launched, health-focused shoppers treated it as validation, a legacy name finally catching up to its reputation. USDA Organic on the front, whole grains at the top of the ingredient list, a combination that tends to earn trust without anyone digging further. Arnold belongs to Bimbo Bakeries USA, the same parent company behind Oro Wheat, the same $22 billion operation. Here's the specific gap. Sara Lee has been independently tested for glyphosate. Nature's Own has been tested. Dave's Killer Bread has been tested repeatedly, across multiple years, by multiple independent labs. Arnold Organic, under that same corporate umbrella, has no publicly available glyphosate results we could find anywhere. We're not saying Arnold would necessarily match Sara Lee's worst number. We can't say that, because the data simply isn't public. What we can say is that Bimbo's record across every brand it does test makes this particular silence hard to justify. They paid for the organic label. They haven't shown what that label actually guarantees. The ingredients tell their own story. Organic soybean oil, organic cane sugar, cultured wheat flour, ascorbic acid, not the makeup of a traditional loaf. The slices are perfectly uniform, and the texture barely changes for weeks at room temperature. Actual bread doesn't do that. Arnold sits at a 2.4-star average on major review platforms, with shoppers describing bread that's dry straight out of the bag, quality that's slipped year after year, and a price that keeps climbing. 85 years of brand recognition, 0 public test results. That's not reassurance. It's a question the company has chosen not to answer. Number 5. Wonder Bread. It doesn't market itself as organic. It markets itself as the all-American staple. The loaf your grandmother trusted. The one that belongs on every counter. Florida's Department of Health tested Wonder Bread Classic White in February 2026 and found 173.19 parts per billion of glyphosate. Now pair that number with the ingredient panel. Calcium sulfate, the same compound used in construction drywall. Sodium stearoyl lactylate, monocalcium peroxide, and enriched bleached wheat flour, stripped of its natural nutrients. Bleached, then fortified synthetically to replace what processing removed. Squeeze a loaf in the store. It collapses to almost nothing and then bounces fully back. That's the ingredient list showing itself physically. Wonder Bread is owned by Flowers Foods, the same parent company as Nature's Own, running through the same supply chain. Consider the long game. 2 slices a day for 40 years adds up to roughly 30,000 individual servings. Toast at breakfast, a sandwich at lunch, a bun at every summer cookout for 4 decades straight. Exposure builds the same way debt does, quietly, and it doesn't reverse itself on its own. Here's something worth remembering, though. Your body starts clearing its chemical load the moment you stop adding to it. The next clean slice you eat matters more than every contaminated one before it. But Wonder Bread sold generations of families a grandmother's kitchen and delivered something she never would have recognized as food. Number 4. Sara Lee Honey Wheat. Sara Lee has been a fixture in American kitchens for 70 years. Birthday cakes, holiday desserts, and honey wheat as its everyday sandwich loaf, with warm golden packaging that promises something homemade and wholesome. Florida's Department of Health tested it in February 2026 and recorded 191.04 parts per billion of glyphosate, the single highest reading in the entire state testing round, beating out both Wonder Bread and Nature's Own in that same lab. Sara Lee posted the worst number in Florida's published results. The brand is owned by Bimbo Bakeries USA, acquired back in 2011, the same parent company behind Oro Wheat and Arnold. Read the label closely. Honey shows up in the product name, but corn syrup is what's actually in the ingredient list. One is marketing, the other is what's really sweetening your bread. Keep reading and you'll find calcium sulfate again, the drywall compound, alongside monoglycerides and datum. For someone managing type 2 diabetes, that combination is actively working against their blood sugar with every bite. In early 2025, a video circulated showing a Sara Lee loaf sitting at room temperature for over 3 months with no visible mold. Week after week, completely unchanged. Bread that refuses to spoil wasn't built for a human body. It was built for a warehouse shelf. The highest glyphosate reading in the state's data, a sweetener that contradicts the name on the bag, 70 years of consumer trust sitting on top of all of it. And the next brand charges a premium for a heritage it abandoned long ago. Number 3. Pepperidge Farm. The red packaging, The old-fashioned script, a name that sounds like a property with a stone wall and a vegetable garden out back. Pepperidge Farm has been baking since 1937, and it's the loaf people reach for when they want something that feels a notch above everything else nearby. It's owned by the Campbell Company, which pulls in over $10 billion a year. Independent lab testing found 587 parts per billion of glyphosate in Pepperidge Farm's 100% whole grain, whole wheat, and their Jewish rye and pumpernickel deli swirl came in at 531, nearly triple what Nature's Own registered in Florida's testing. Worth noting, Pepperidge Farm's Farmhouse Hardy White showed no detectable glyphosate in that same February 2026 round, so the brand isn't consistent across its whole lineup. But its whole grain and rye products land among the most contaminated branded breads in any independent testing we reviewed. The reason is specific. Glyphosate is used as a pre-harvest desiccant, meaning some conventional farmers spray Roundup directly onto standing grain to speed up drying before harvest. That last-minute application concentrates residue right in the outer hull of the kernel, and whole wheat bread keeps that hull, while white bread is milled from flour with the outer layer stripped away. So the version marketed as the healthier pick can end up more contaminated than the plain white loaf next to it. Bayer, which acquired Monsanto and manufactures glyphosate, has already paid roughly $11 billion to settle close to 100,000 lawsuits from people who developed non-Hodgkin lymphoma, and in February 2026 proposed an additional $7.25 billion settlement covering current and future claims. While continuing to deny that glyphosate causes cancer, Pepperidge Farm sits at a 2-star average on major review sites, with complaints about an off, chemical aftertaste, noticeable quality decline, and shrinkflation that cut loaf weight from 22 ounces down to 14, while the price stayed the same. You're paying a heritage premium on grain sourced exactly like every other industrial brand on this list. Number 2. Dave's Killer Bread. This is the loaf health-conscious shopper's grab without a second thought. Bold graphic bags, dense seedy slices, a founder's redemption story printed right on the packaging. USDA, organic, non-GMO project verified, praised by nutritionists and recommended by trainers. It's sitting in millions of kitchens because the people buying it are convinced they've already solved the bread problem. Then the lab results came in. The Alliance for Natural Health measured 136 parts per billion of glyphosate in the whole wheat variety, while Florida's Department of Health found 11.85 parts per billion in white done right and 10.38 in 21 whole grains and seeds. Yes, those numbers sit below the conventional brands, and that's exactly the problem. Lower isn't the same as zero. A brand that's built its entire identity on being the organic gold standard and prices itself accordingly has made a specific promise. This isn't a close call. It's a broken promise. You're not paying extra for almost clean. Flowers Foods bought Dave's Killer Bread in 2015 for $275 million, and distribution scaled almost overnight from a small Pacific Northwest operation to nationwide shelves through Flowers' own delivery network. The founder's story stayed on the packaging. The industrial supply chain moved in quietly behind it. It's owned by the same $5 billion company that owns Nature's Own and Wonder Bread. Same corporate parent, same sourcing infrastructure, independent-looking packaging over a supply chain that isn't. In September 2024, a class action was certified in a California federal court, alleging the company overstates the protein content on the front of its good seed and 21 whole grains and seeds packaging. Flowers has denied it. Customer reviews mention texture drier than crackers and confusion over whether the sprouted grain claims match what's actually in the bag. Some people buy this bread because it's the only one their body tolerates, which makes the distance between the promise and the lab results worse, not better. The story on the packaging sells the loaf. The lab results tell you what's actually inside it. Number 1. 365 by Whole Foods. This is the brand that made us question whether anything in the bread aisle actually means what it claims. Amazon owns Whole Foods, and Whole Foods sells its own 365 brand organic bread. Independent lab testing found glyphosate at 1,040 parts per billion in 365 whole wheat sandwich bread, a figure that lands near the very top of every independent database of branded consumer bread we looked at. Whole Foods spent years building its identity around what it refused to carry. No bromated flour, no artificial colors, no acrylamide, an official banned ingredients list running past 80 substances. Every part of the shopping experience is designed to say, the standard here is different, and the test results simply don't match that message. Amazon bought Whole Foods in 2017 for $13.7 billion, and multiple former executives have since described what changed internally. Errol Schweitzer, a former vice president who spent 14 years at the company, is among those who've spoken publicly about a more centralized, industrialized supply chain, replacing the sourcing philosophy the store was originally built around. Decisions driven by logistics numbers instead of ingredient standards. Reviews of 365 bread describe dry texture, heavy crumbling, and a structure closer to cardboard than to bread, with some shoppers reporting holes large enough to make it unusable for sandwiches. The predictable industry response will be that 1,040 parts per billion still falls under the EPA's legal ceiling of 30,000. What that response leaves out is a 2015 peer-reviewed King's College London study showing that ultra-low doses of Roundup, well below what regulators currently screen for in food, produced measurable shifts in gene expression across thousands of transcripts in the livers and kidneys of lab rats. Not industrial strength exposure, not occupational exposure. Doses lower than what the regulatory system even monitors. Those legal tolerances were built around a healthy adult in their 30s, eating one chemical from one food source, not someone in their 70s managing blood pressure, cholesterol, and thyroid medication, while also picking up bread residue on top of cereal, crackers, and pasta across a single afternoon. You did everything you were supposed to, paid the higher price, chose the store with the reputation, picked the house brand organic loaf because you trusted what that name stood for. The lab found 1,040 parts per billion of weed killer in it anyway. If the one retailer that built its whole brand on refusing to compromise can't keep its own bread clean, what does that say about everything else on those shelves? Now that you know what to steer clear of, here are the 3 brands that actually held up. Not consolation picks, but companies that test what they sell, publish the results, and source their grain in a fundamentally different way. Best option number 3, Food for Life, Ezekiel 4:9. Start with something most shoppers don't realize. There's no flour in this bread at all. Food for Life sprouts 6 organic whole grains and legumes: wheat, barley, millet, lentils, soybeans, and spelt, then bakes them slowly at controlled temperatures to preserve nutritional value. This isn't an industrial loaf with a fresh coat of marketing. It's a genuinely different process. The brand carries the bio-checked, non-glyphosate certified seal, which doesn't just certify a process, it certifies an outcome. Glyphosate residue in the finished loaf undetectable at the laboratory's testing threshold. That's the bar every brand on the avoid list should be measured against, and isn't. Ezekiel bread scores around 36 on the glycemic index, compared with 70 or higher for typical white bread. A meaningful gap for anyone watching blood sugar. not a trivial one. The ingredient list runs just 11 items, everyone recognizable as actual food. No added sugar, no preservatives, no dough conditioners, nothing borrowed from a construction supply list. Food for Life has been family-owned and baking in Corona, California since 1964, with no multinational buyout, at least not yet. The texture is nothing like anything on the avoid list. Dense, chewy, hearty, usually best toasted. Look for it in the freezer aisle rather than the bread shelf. Without preservatives, it molds at room temperature. Not a flaw, but proof you're holding real food. Best option number 2. 1 Degree Organics. This company does something almost no other bread brand in the country bothers with. It publishes the exact farm source for every single ingredient. Scan the QR code on the bag, and you can trace the wheat back to the specific field it came from. Not just the state or the region, the actual farm. 1 Degree carries the same bio-checked, non-glyphosate certified seal, and according to the company, sends random product samples to accredited third-party labs every single month. No regulation forces this. No law requires it. They do it because testing the finished product and publishing the results is the only real way to prove what's actually in the bag. The ingredients: organic sprouted whole wheat, water, organic whole grain oats, organic cane, sugar, yeast, sea salt, organic cultured wheat. That's the entire list. No DATEM, no calcium sulfate, no monoglycerides. Open a bag and you get an immediate grain smell, and the texture pulls apart instead of compressing and snapping back. It tears the way something baked should, not something engineered. Distribution is still limited, so you may need a natural grocery store or a direct order, and that inconvenience is real. It's also exactly what you'd expect from a company that hasn't handed its supply chain over to a $5 billion industrial operator. Best option number 1, Silver Hills Sprouted Bakery. If Ezekiel's dense texture feels like too big an adjustment, and you want an everyday clean sandwich loaf, you don't have to think twice about. This is the most practical pick on the whole list. Silver Hills is a Canadian, family-owned company, and every product it makes carries the bio-checked, non-glyphosate certified seal, with residue levels verified below the lab's detection threshold on an ongoing basis. When the WHO's International Agency for Research on Cancer classified glyphosate as probably carcinogenic to humans back in 2015, Silver Hills stated publicly that the findings shaped their sourcing standards, a company reacting to evidence instead of lobbying against it. Their loaves deliver solid fiber, whole grain, and protein per serving, and the Omega Amazing variety is a verified source of omega-3 ALA, relevant for heart health. The full lineup is plant-based, nut-free, non-GMO verified, and certified vegan. In the US, it's available at Sprouts, Whole Foods, and other natural grocers. In Canada, at Loblaws, Metro, and other major chains. Every batch tested, every result verified, with no corporate parent running a margin calculation that overrides the sourcing standard. Reviewers consistently rank Silver Hills among the best sprouted grain breads on the market, and one customer with a documented wheat sensitivity noted that her body tolerates this brand when almost every other wheat product causes problems. Unlike Ezekiel, the texture is hearty, but still soft enough for an everyday sandwich straight out of the bag. The most approachable clean option for anyone making the switch without wanting to rethink what bread is supposed to feel like. It costs more than anything on the avoid list, and availability depends on where you live. Both trade-offs are real, and both are the natural result of a company that tests every batch and actually sources what it claims to. Before you go, here's the one rule worth remembering. Stop buying bread that sits fine at room temperature and lists more than 5 ingredients. That single filter knocks almost everything on the avoid list right out of your cart. No corporate research required, no numbers to memorize. Just flip the bag over in the store and count. Real bread is flour, water, salt, yeast, and maybe a little healthy oil. 5 ingredients. Everything past that was added to stretch shelf life, fake freshness, or cut sourcing costs. Look past the USDA organic seal, too. It only confirms glyphosate wasn't intentionally sprayed on that crop. It says nothing about what actually ends up in the finished loaf. The 2 certifications that actually require lab testing of the finished product are bio-checked, non-glyphosate certified, and non-GM. O-Project verified. One is a promise about process. The other 2 are proof about outcome. Buy from the freezer section when you can. Bread that survives weeks at room temperature was engineered for the supply chain, and bread that hardens or molds within days was made for you. If you bake at home, hold your flour to the same standard before it ever hits the bowl. Clean bread costs more, roughly 50 cents extra per slice at the high end. But that's still far cheaper than managing the long-term health conditions that build up from decades of daily exposure nobody warned you about. The European Union heavily restricts pre-harvest glyphosate use. In the US, it remains standard practice, and the residue it leaves behind sits right next to organic seals that were never built to catch it. The labels were designed to earn your trust without actually earning it. Now you know how to look past them. If this changed the way you look at your own bread aisle, sending it to someone who buys these brands regularly is probably the most useful thing you can do with it.